Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be talking about singer, songwriter, guitar player, actor, author, Marshall Crenshaw. And I'm also going to feature some Robert Crenshaw at the end, so definitely stick around for that. Anyway, I always like to start these videos off telling you how I got into the artists I talk about. For Marshall Crenshaw, it was because I was a big fan of Robert Gordon, and Robert Gordon did a cover version of Someday, Some Way, and I really liked that. And I remember walking into the record store. Now, I don't remember if it was our friend Rick Infelt or me or my brother Mike that bought the first Marshall Crenshaw album first. Of course, since it's my video, I'm going to say it was me. But I remember picking it up and thinking, that name's familiar. And I flipped it over, and it was produced by Richard Gotterer. And I thought, he's produced some great albums, including the first Yachts album just a few years before. So I immediately bought it and took it home. I put the needle down on the record, and boom, boom, I was hooked from the very beginning. I was hooked by the hooks that filled this album. As everybody knows, Marshall Crenshaw is a great pop songwriter. But here's the thing. A lot of times people lumped him in with power pop. I never considered Marshall Crenshaw power pop for some reason, probably because of the linkage to Robert Gordon. And I was thinking that here's a guy who writes great songs, and his songs have what I call sweet melodies. And what I mean by sweet melodies, I don't mean saccharine sweet. I mean they're just like beautiful and sweet. He's got an amazing voice that sort of wraps itself around these melodies. He really, really knows how to craft a song from the inside out. But anyway, the reason I never lumped him in with power pop was I always thought he was more of an American roots guy who just wrote great songs. But let's start with the first album, 1982's self-titled album. I remember picking this up and thinking, wow, this is pretty darn amazing. This is the expanded version on CD. And of course, this has Someday, Some Way, Marianne, Cynical Girl, Rockin' Around in NYC, She Can't Dance, a cover version of Soldier of Love, There She Goes Again. Fantastic album, 1982. The band was Marshall Crenshaw, his brother Robert on drums, and Chris Donato on bass. It was a trio, and they made this beautiful, wonderful, heavenly sound. 1 year later, out comes the album Field Day, and this was an entirely different beast. Field Day is another great album, but he has a different producer on this. He has Steve Lillywhite, and Steve Lillywhite added a real dense sound. I don't think it drowned out the melodies because it's a great record. It's a crunchier record than the debut album, but it's still pretty darn amazing. It's got some great songs like Whenever You're on My Mind, Our Town, For Her Love, Monday Morning Rock. And Tom Teely sings backing vocals on this. From what I understand, Tom Teely was in Beatlemania with Marshall before his solo career. Tom Teely also put out an album on A&M Records, which completely different than this, and I love that Tom Teely record. I don't think we'll ever see that on CD, but it's a fine record. Took another 2 years, but in 1985 comes Downtown. This was a slight detour back to sort of like a rootsy American sound, produced by T-Bone Burnett. Blues is King, which was produced by Mitch Easter on this album, is one of Marshall's greatest tracks. Lots of different people played on this record. Chris Donato and Robert Crenshaw are still in the band, but it looks like there's like a lot of different session musicians. Lots of great songs on this album. The thing about Marshall, it was always about the melody. If the production was big and booming, the melody was right there at the core. If the production was minimalist, the melody was still right there at the core, and that's what made him a great artist. It was always about the songs and that voice. 1987 gave us Mary Jean and 9 Others. This is the first album not to feature Chris Donato on bass. He's been replaced by Graham Mabey, who used to be in the Joe Jackson Band. This album contains some fine tracks, including This Is Easy, Mary Jean, Somebody Crying, This Street, Calling Out for Love at Crying Time. So Mary Jean and 9 Others, that came out in 1987. 1989 gave us Good Evening, which was the first album without his brother Robert. This is also an album that features the least amount of Marshall Crenshaw originals. Good Evening came out in 1989, and this was his last album with Warner Brothers. 1991 rolls around, and Life's Too Short, produced by Ed Stasium. This is back to a straightforward rock and roll sound. Yes, it sounds 1991, but it's great because it's Ed Stasium, and he always puts the power and the punch back into the rock and the pop. This has Never Back Off, which is great. Don't Disappear Now. Both of those were co-written by Tom Teely again. There's fantastic Fantastic Planet of Love, Starting Tomorrow. 1991, Life's Too Short. Took another 5 years, but out comes Miracle of Science, which is his first independent album, and it's really stripped back to the point of you're back to the core of what Marshall Crenshaw is all about. No production getting in the way, and just the songs presenting themselves in the most glorious way possible. This album has What Do You Dream Of?, which is absolutely amazing. Who Stole That Train? Starless Summer Skies, another great song. Brad Jones and Bill Lloyd are on this album. Both of them are legends in the pop community. So Miracle of Science was 1996. 1999 comes number 447, another great collection of songs that continues in that stripped-down, straightforward, great songwriting, great performances. This features TMD, Truly, Madly, Deeply, which was co-written by Bill DeMaine, which is one of my favorite Marshall Crenshaw songs there. The album features Brad Jones and Bill Lloyd again, plus Pat Buchanan. Another 4 years pass before we get What's in the Bag. Again, continuing in this great down-to-earth Marshall Crenshaw sound. Great melodies, great vocals, great performances all around. Just another fine collection of songs here. Graham Mabey is back on bass, and Eric Amble's there, and Tom Teeley. Tom! What's in the Bag? 2003. Took another 6 years before Jagged Land made it, and there's another great Marshall Crenshaw album. Jim Keltner is on this album, Mike Viola, Wayne Kramer. Great collection of songs, great album. Now, between 2012 and 2015, he released 6 vinyl EPs. Each EP had one new song, one cover version, and the third song was like a reimagining or revisiting an old song. In 2015, he released the EP collection. And what this does, this collects the new songs and the cover versions and then adds a couple bonus tracks to it. So not only are you going to be able to hear cool Marshall songs like Move Now and Driving and Dreaming's great, but you'll also hear him do a great version of They Long to Be Close to You, the Carpenter song, and it's fantastic. It sticks pretty close to the original arrangement, but then it gets all nutty and crazy at the end, which is absolutely wonderful. Then that is it for his studio albums, but I did want to discuss something that came out in 2020. Remember Miracle of Science? I told you about that. Well, he went back to the master tapes, rejigged it, played with it, and it sounds better and just really contemporary and warm to the touch and to the ear, and it's just absolutely amazing. Miracle of Science, this is the brand new version of the album. Contains the full album plus some bonus material, including new recordings down here at the bottom. So definitely check that out. That is Marshall Crenshaw, the new version of Miracle of Science. That is available now. Track that down. Now let's talk about some Marshall Crenshaw compilations real quickly here before I move on to Robert Crenshaw. And you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. This was a promo that came out to promote the Life's Too Short album. This is the first time you were able to get, like, You're My Favorite Waste of Time on CD. Maybe Something's Gonna Happen appeared here for the first time. But this was kind of a best of his career up to that point. It's not comprehensive, but it's just enough as a few songs from Life's Too Short and then a few songs from his back catalog if you want to look at that. Everyone seems to love that B-side, You're My Favorite Waste of Time, which was actually a demo. And the 9-Volt Years collects demos recorded at that same time, including You're My Favorite Waste of Time and a whole lot more. In fact, there's a song here called Bruce is King, which is an instrumental that became the song Blues is King. And lots of great stuff there. Some unreleased tracks, some later recorded for his studio albums. Just a great collection of songs. Definitely check that out, the 9-Volt Years. If you're into a more comprehensive Marshall Crenshaw collection, you might want to get This Is Easy. This came out on Warner Archives, and it's a great collection. This is a single disc. There is another 2 CD set that features pretty much a good chunk of his Warner Brothers output, and you can get that. I mean, you can't go wrong with Marshall Crenshaw. But remember when I told you about his brother Robert played drums on the first 4 albums, and then that lineup split, and Robert went off. Took him a while to put out his first solo album. Now, if you thought, oh, he's a drummer, all his albums are going to sound like Ringo albums. They don't. Robert Crenshaw, amazingly talented singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist. If you're into all the Marshall Crenshaw solo albums, you're definitely going to want to hear the Robert Crenshaw, because They are absolutely great. He does not suffer from a case of Ringo-itis. This album features Jamie Hoover, Don Dixon, Marshall Crenshaw's on here. This is called Full-Length Stereo Recordings. Came out in 1999. Fantastic friggin' album. Great songs. In the year 2000, Victory Songs came out. Again, this features great people like, let's say, Don Dixon, Marty Jones, John Crenshaw, Graham Maybe, more great artists on there. That was Victory Songs, came out in the year 2000. 2003, Dog Dreams. Third great Robert Crenshaw album in a row. Every album, it's mostly originals. He does toss in a few different covers on there, but it's just full of pop wonderfulness, and I highly recommend it if you're a Marshall Crenshaw fan. If you're a fan of 60s influenced jangle and Baroque pop and all that stuff, Bacharach pop, Spectre-esque pop, you're definitely going to want to check out Robert Crenshaw. Dog Dreams, this is, gosh, a lot of Jamie Hoover all over this. Graham Maybe's on it, John Crenshaw's on this, Marshall Crenshaw's on this. Just, I can't stress enough that if you're a Marshall fan, you're definitely going to want to get the Robert Crenshaw albums. There's an EP released in 2012 called Atheist Christmas, and then a new album didn't come out until 2014 called Friends, Family, and Neighbors. Again, this features a lot of his friends like Graham Maybe, Don Dixon, Jamie Hoover, and there's a song on here, a cover version of I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, which is Marshall Crenshaw, Robert Crenshaw, John Crenshaw, and I believe Dean Crenshaw might be John's son. So it's a quartet of Crenshaws. A Crenshaw-tet. Anyway, that is Robert Crenshaw, Friends, Family, and Neighbors, came out in 2014. What I want to let you know is Robert Crenshaw wrote a book about his life in the rock and roll world, including his years, of course, with his brother Marshall. And that book was released in the summer of 2019. It is called My Mythological Narrative, A Rock Odyssey, and that's available in stores now. I personally don't own it. Eventually I'm going to get it. I usually don't buy any books unless it says the word comic book on it, but I think I'm going to make an exception for this book. Anyway, that's it for this episode of CD Junkie. I appreciate you hanging out and listening to me babble about some great music. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. Until the next time, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD Junkie.